It's a very good morning. It's I think you obviously for Nazanin and her family, I think all your listeners have probably experienced watching the harrowing recently of the hunger strikes of Richard and but to see someone come home after such a horrific situation and a very troubling time for the world, I think it's lifted everybody's spirits as well.
Yeah, it certainly has, and it's been 6 long years. I mean, again, I think most of us can't imagine. Like me as a mum, the thought of not being able to be with my daughter or my husband for 6 long years. I mean, she was able to have visits from her daughter once a week, once a fortnight or so for those first few years. And then the decision was to send Gabriella back to the UK to be with her father as she started school. So parted from everyone other than her parents, of course, at that point. Absolutely harrowing. Why now is what a lot of people are asking. Is this because Britain has paid what is... No question at all. It is clearly just under £400 million. It is a debt that the UK government owes the Tehran government. It was a deal for tanks that were never delivered with the Shah government. Once the Iranian Revolution happened, we didn't deliver those tanks, and therefore we owed that money back. That has been well established. But it's always been seen effectively as being tied to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's freedom and other detainees. Of course, we also saw the release of Anousheh Ashuri and Morad Tabas, but not names that are familiar to us on the front page of newspapers of the last 6 years. Is the timing significant?
I think it's very suspicious. And when you look at the fact that, hours after the payment was made, a payment which, like you said, was due, so a lot of people are calling it a ransom, but hours after it was made, they are released. Now, that's the facts. And then, people can come to the conclusion that they wish, but it's very suspicious timing, I think. And if you look at where we are with Russia, the need to look to other countries for oil, and to have other friends that can supply that now, it's also, I think, suspicious with that timing as well.
Yeah, indeed. We say suspicious, but the reality is we've always known that Nazanin was being held as a political pawn. We know that. This is the modus operandi of the Iranian government and indeed of a number of governments in the Middle East. It used to just be rather more blatant hostage taking, and they don't need to take hostages in the same way. They can just simply use their, pretense of a judicial system. Nazanin, gets charged with something, is told about the charges in court, and 20 minutes later is sentenced. That's not a judicial system we would recognise here in the West as being anything of the sort. But this is political, government policy in countries like Iran.
It is. But I think what's also important to look at is what our policy was in terms of what Richard was told and what lots of British detainees abroad are told. Don't go to the media, make it quiet political diplomacy. And he didn't do that. And that is why I'm sure that one of the reasons why she is back in England today, and when many Brits that don't do that are also back in England. And that's something that we need to look at what our policy is as the Foreign Office when we're dealing with British people detained abroad.
Well, we know that some other countries, France notably, happily pays hostage takers and gets people back. And then the president, whoever it is, meets them at the steps of the plane and is the hero for getting these people back. And it's well known in international diplomatic circles that that's what they do. Italians as well. America and Britain are always very clear. We do not pay hostages. We will not pay ransoms. This is very different, this 400 million. But there was an argument was that we weren't going to pay it. And when they were holding one of our nationals, a dual national, of course, and more than one, behind bars. But Richard Ratcliffe, he has said, look, he was advised, like all these families are advised, don't go public. Behind the scenes works better. And he said yesterday in an interview before Nazanin's actual return, but once she was on the plane and safe, his advice to any family would be do not listen to that advice. He, of course, has worked for Reuters. He had lots of, colleagues, knew how the media worked, and he has played an absolute blinder, keeping her case alive in the eyes of the British public and therefore putting pressure on the government. There's no doubt at all that the Foreign Office works in very different ways if there's public pressure.
Well, you're exactly right. And we've helped countless people, specifically coming from the UAE, who have been told exactly that. Ridiculous cases where people have been jailed for having a drink in a pub in the UAE, where they're stuck there or they're actually in jail for a period of time. The Foreign Office said, don't speak, don't tell anyone, we'll deal with it quietly. And of course, that never happens. As soon as the media gets involved, people are going home in a day or two or a little bit longer. And that's one of the, like you said, that putting that pressure on the Foreign Office makes them work. But I think, what we do need to do now is consider and review what the Foreign Office is telling British people and their families detained abroad. Are they fit for purpose? in protecting British people abroad. I don't think they are, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah, indeed. And in terms of the role of some of the personalities involved, we talked about the power of what Richard Ratcliffe has done and his tireless campaigning. And I say, may we all be married to someone who would campaign for us like that. I mean, that was an incredible man. Hunger strikes, absolutely, just day in, day out, working to free his wife and the mother of their child. But what about the various prime ministers and foreign secretaries? I think, is it 5 foreign secretaries and 3 prime ministers this case has been dealt with by? Boris Johnson, of course, as foreign secretary, was held responsible for her getting another year in detention after what some call a gaffe, but other people just fear just Boris Johnson being Boris Johnson. And when he was Foreign Secretary at the Select Committee, talking about all she had been doing was training journalists in Iran, which is, in Iran, quite wrongly, a crime, but also was not what she was doing.
Well, I think that's the thing, and I think that comes into that needs to be a proper review of policy on how you treat Brits abroad. I mean, you can't have foreign ministers, you can't have diplomats in countries, without a proper strategy and policy, just shooting from the hip. Because look what happened when, like you said, it's Boris being Boris, but look what happened then. It cost her a year or more of her life, and it could have cost her a lot more. That shouldn't ever be allowed to happen. There needs to be clarity on what and how you deal with Brits abroad, and that really needs to be reviewed.
Indeed, and Liz Truss's role, she has, we're told, been pretty instrumental in taking these talks forward, but I wonder how much more of it, as you touched on at the beginning of the conversation, is actually about timing. We know there's a new government elected in Tehran last year, a bit of a reset of relations, the focus being on these Vienna talks over developing their nuclear programme, and whether they're desperate to get rid of the sanctions. The West now, having sanctioned Russian oil, desperate to get Iranian oil. Suddenly, all of these things collide for the perfect moment.
Exactly, and I think credit where it's due in terms of Liz Truss. I mean, she's managed, and I'm sure it's not just her. I'm sure many people have put working behind the scenes. But she's in charge of the shop that's actually managed to get these people home and free, and maybe another one soon as well. Yeah. And I think all credit to her for that.
Anousheh Ashuri, a retired civil engineer in his late 60s, he was also released, came back on the plane with Nazanin's Gary Ratcliffe, and Morad Tabaz, another British Iranian national, he has been released from jail, but he's decided to remain with his family in Iran. How many others are there? How many other foreign nationals are being held in Iran, or indeed held around the Middle East, being used in this way?
I mean, it's been used in that way. There's not many, but certainly that are detained arbitrarily, that are detained in appropriate circumstances, unjustly. There's thousands if you look at the Middle East as a even in
and that's not to mention all of the nationals of their own country who are being held. I mean, in these countries, there isn't a proper judicial system in most countries around the Middle East.
Well, not at all. And if we look at the UAE, we've seen their own royal family members fleeing the UAE and their so-called justice system, coming to England for safety. So their own people also get equally bad treatment as foreigners do.
Yeah, indeed. Your final thoughts on this news, though, and what happens now? Because I do wonder also just how hard, it's a wonderful day and sleeping in your family home with your child in the next room, your husband by your side. I mean, just be amazing. But, this is going to be a really hard readjustment, isn't it, for a family that after so many years apart. And we know she had a very difficult time in prison. Richard has talked about her having been effectively tortured by the Iranian authorities. These scars, you don't just forget about this the next morning, do you?
No, I think that's something that's also where the Foreign Office, again, isn't fit for purpose. So when people do come back, and I've seen it personally, but also in others that we help, there is zero support to reintegrate people that have been through quite horrific things over a prolonged period of time back into the world. Not just the fact that, that she's used now a flurry of media attention, but getting back into normal life for her with what she's been through, probably things like post-traumatic stress disorder or worse. And that's very difficult. And there is no government support to assist with that. You have to rely on your friends and your family.
Yeah.